started. We'll continue the hearing on 379. We have a full agenda today. First up on the list is on the bill. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Senate Bill 379 would regulate the use of autonomous motor vehicles. Kind of key elements of the bill. Section 2 would prohibit any city or county from enacting any ordinance or resolution prohibiting the use of autonomous motor vehicles. Section 3 grants autonomous motor vehicles the ability to operate while traveling the middle mile, which is a defined term in Section 1 in Kansas. And this would be regardless of whether a human operator is physically present in the vehicle. However, such vehicles must be able to operate in compliance with traffic laws, negotiate railroad crossings, operate in compliance with federal law and safety standards, comply with insurance requirements, and achieve minimal risk of harm or injury. And then Section 4 would require human operators to possess a valid driver's license when the automated driving system is not engaged in the vehicle. And for vehicles operating with the automated driving system engaged, the owner of the vehicle is considered the operator for compliance with traffic laws. And then lastly, the remote operator of an automated driving system is required to possess a valid driver's license for the class of vehicle being operated. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adam? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. First up, we have Secretary Loren, Department of Transportation, neutral testimony. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, all. I am Julie Loren, Secretary for the Kansas Department of Transportation, and I'm here today to provide neutral testimony. Thank you for allowing me to speak. It's important for the state of Kansas to be engaging in technology of automated and connected vehicles. Advancement in technology is increasing at an exponential rate, and we see the impacts every day in our personal lives. This bill is advancing Kansas in that technology adoption, and there are a few concerns which we think would increase safety and make this bill better for our citizens, visitors, and users of the transportation system. Many states have enacted legislation introducing and allowing connected and automated vehicles, CAVs, on their streets and highways. While Kansas is unique from other states, we also recognize proven concepts in their legislation, which has helped the success of CAV implementation. The following are some suggestions to enhance safety to our highway users and for long-term sustainability. There are a couple of little technical things. For example, to strike related actions under Section 12D1B and add driving functions related to KSA 8, Article 15, and amendments. Essentially, that allows all traffic signals, not just those listed in the bill. So that would be a good addition for safety. Also, not just only at railroad safe crossings, but all roadway features should be included in the bill, not just rail crossings. Vehicles need to safely negotiate other types of complex intersections and traffic control devices. Also, a consideration of a pilot or a period of time where a safety driver is in the vehicle during operations. We would also suggest that the bill would establish some sort of partnership with a public agency to ensure that Kansas motorist safety is a top priority. This could be through the establishment of a statewide advisory committee with the role of the committee to help guide public information, make recommendations on needed CAV actions that reflect well-vetted private and public sector CAV policies, and to support partnerships, policy development, research, and program oversight and communication. We also suggest a requirement of a report back to the legislature and the governor on progress, impacts, and possible next steps for future automation deployments. This is an exciting time in Kansas and really across the nation in the transportation industry as we take steps to increase the safe mobility of people and goods across our great state. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Any questions for the Secretary? Senator Powell.
The railroads, are they operating with remote drivers, people running those engines?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you, Mr. Chairman?
Do not know. I know they're operating with some positive train control, but I think they all have an engineer in them.
I understand there's two.
A lot of them there are.
Yeah, and that they do not operate remotely. So just, I find it interesting that we're talking about putting trucks on our highways, and yet, you know, the rails are on rails. We know where they're going. So anyway, I just wanted to know if you were informed on that. So it might be some things that maybe the department ought to check into as to how much is being done with the railroads as to remote activity. Thank you.
Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Secretary. It's always good having you in here. When you look at this, or when your staff looked at this, it is a pretty narrow definition. Do you think it's too narrow of a definition when you look at this, when we talk about the state and how we approach CAVs?
Narrow definition in what sense?
Well, right now it's defined with a very specific kind of middle mile kind of definition. Very kind of with we're looking at a particular company who's doing it in a certain way. And I didn't know if the state's looking at, if we are looking at how we regulate these things, if we might ought to be looking at a more generalized framework or something like that.
I would say that I don't know how, I don't believe other states have looked at it that way in terms of an exclusive view on middle mile. That is, what I would go back to is sort of the heart and soul of our IKE principles, which is working in partnership with both communities. I have some, I think, when I think about Kansas drivers, the way we have approached like the road usage charge study and other sorts of things is making sure we bring people along as we go. So I think this idea of some sort of advisory committee, whether it's related to middle mile or a future expansion or keeping it narrow or whatever, I think having an advisory committee could be helpful in plotting next steps.
Thanks.
Committee for their questions? Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just elaborate a little bit on your last point under safety? The bill should establish a pilot where safety drivers in the vehicle during operations. Yeah, sorry about that. Can you elaborate on your last point under safety?
Sure. So in many states, there is a period, and I think that it would be for this body to decide if that period is 3 months, 6 months, whatever. But typically, there's a bit of a period of sort of a test or a pilot or a proving sort of period when you would have a driver in the vehicle for a certain amount of time. I think this is, so I think that would be something to consider. I don't think it has to be an extended period, but from my perspective, it's more about getting citizens comfortable with what's going on our highways. Like I referenced the road usage charge study where we're taking 2 years. It took us 2 years to build the IKE program. Sometimes there's value in bringing folks along and doing some public education. Thank you.
Next up, we have Ed Klemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Ed Klemp. I'm here representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Kansas Peace Officers Association. I want to make clear, we struggled with whether our testimony should be neutral or opposing, and I'll tell you why we went neutral. And some of it may sound like we're opposing, but I want to assure you we are not. We need to embrace technology, and this technology has come a long way. The question is the time now? And that's a question that's beyond our knowledge and scope. What I want to focus on from our associations is our role as law enforcement officers in traffic safety and going in and cleaning up the messes when things fail. One of the things that I learned in my career as a law enforcement officer is you always plan for success, but you always have in the back of your mind the alternate plan when things fail. Just as you, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure when you sat down today, you plan for the technology in this room to work, so that your remote people can testify, but you also know in your mind what you're going to do if it fails. And that's kind of where we're at with this. We have a couple of particular things we want to point out, but I want to kind of focus on the regulation aspect of this bill. And the first thing I want to point out is that the bill has a provision in here that refers to the federal regulations. There is nothing in this bill that authorizes or refers to any state regulations. Now, maybe there's some other law in Chapter 8 that extends that authority to the Department of Transportation or Department of Revenue to have regulations on this, but I don't see anything in this bill, and that concerns us a little bit, whether that's even going to be available. But clearly there needs to be regulations on this. And I say that because we've heard testimony from the proponents that the companies involved here, Walmart, and I forget the name of the technology company, have a system that has proven to be reliable in the places they're operating it. But this bill doesn't just allow them to operate. If this bill were to pass as it is, any company could come in with a system and put it on vehicles and operate it. And we don't know what those companies' technology capabilities are going to be. So somehow we have to have oversight to make sure as new companies come in that they're meeting certain standards that need to be in place to assure the safety of Kansans on the highways. And I rarely see this body refer wholly to federal regulations to determine that for us, and things that aren't within your control. And so I just point that out, that seems to be a gap in this. I want to also talk about a definition before I get into another issue, and I want to take you to page 1, line 6 through 8, and give you an example of where, and this is getting pretty technical, but I think it's something to look at. You'll notice in there that the automated driving system means the hardware and software that would install on a motor vehicle and engaged are collectively capable of performing. Well, I think collectively refers to the hardware and the software, not hardware, software, and vehicle, the way it's written. But I question, what happens if it's incapable? What happens when it breaks and it's no longer capable of performing without any intervention? And does that mean now that there is no automated driving system legally to apply in the rest of the statute or in the rest of the bill? And so I think those kind of details are very critical and very important to look at and examine very closely. I want to take you to page 2, lines 3 through 5. And this is where it's talking about the city ordinances, county resolutions. And I put that in my testimony. I just mentioned it briefly. I believe I heard Michael Neal say in the proponent testimony they recognized there was some clarity needs to be made with the application of our laws, our traffic laws. And so I'm not going to dwell on that since it's already been acknowledged. Secondly, I want to take you on page 2 to lines 29 through 32. And this is a very important piece of this legislation. And it talks about the owner of the automated driving system is considered to be the operator of the autonomous motor vehicle solely for the purpose of assessing compliance, et cetera. So let's start at the first part of that subsection. Owner is not what we typically think of owner. When you think of an owner of an automobile, you think about the titled owner, right? But look at page 1, starting on lines 35 through page 2, line 2. And for the purpose of this bill, we have a different definition of owner. So it is either the person who holds title of the vehicle, is what we typically think of, or it's the person who has the legal right to possession of a vehicle, so apparently whoever's using it, or the person who has legal right of control of the vehicle. So here, owner is not what we envision typically when we look at traffic law. It can be the title person, but it doesn't have to be. So when you apply that then down in line 29, the owner is the owner as we think of it, but it's also the operator or the person who has the right to possession of the device at the time. And then you see it refers to the automated driving system. Now, if you look back on page 1 again, up on line 6, the automated driving system is not the vehicle. The automated driving system is the hardware and the software. So now we're not even talking about the owner of the vehicle anymore, we're talking about the owner of the hardware and the software. And these are the kind of details that we encounter when we try to take enforcement action or when we try to investigate crashes or things like that, that need to be really hashed out and make sure we have these right. So you go on down through that, and then you get to that phrase, for the purpose of assessing compliance. So the owner is intended here to be the person, solely the person or entity that assesses compliance with traffic laws. Now, assessing can mean one of two things, according to the dictionary. It can mean you are evaluating something, or it means you're assessing a penalty or tax on something. So the way this is written, it is the owner who determines whether there's a violation of the law. There's the owner that determines what the penalty of that is. And the owner isn't necessarily the owner of the vehicle, it's the owner of the system. So you see how this, when you get down to the technicalities of this subsection, it is so murky and so muddy. We are not confident we can perform the duties you expect us to perform in assuring safety on the highways of all of the citizens in Kansas, or to investigate crashes when things go wrong, because it's technology. Does anybody know of any piece of technology that you can say it's never failed? No. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money you put into it. So these are the things we are very concerned about. We think that, you know, the whether or not autonomous vehicles are authorized is a question apart from our function. But if it's going to be authorized, we need the tools that you expect us to use to assure traffic laws are abided by, and to be able to investigate crashes when things go wrong and figure out who gets held accountable for the damage and the injury and the deaths that occur. And so that's what we're asking you to do, is look very closely at this. We need to, as the Secretary said, we need to bring in a group of people that deal with these things in the courts on a regular basis, prosecutors who prosecute traffic things, civil attorneys who handle civil traffic accidents, and make sure we have this language right so it's applicable. And most of all, we need to have language that assures that the good things that we've heard these two companies are doing with autonomous vehicles will be the standard that has to be met when other companies come in line and want to do the same thing on our highways. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time to speak on this. I think this is a very critical venture, and I hope you'll take to heart what I have presented to you and take a deep dive into every word of this, because every word matters. And we want to do this right, and we want to do it safely for our people. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Ed? Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ed. You talked about the language of the bill. Is the language of the bill adopted from other states, in particular some of these areas that you have been?
I have no idea, because I wasn't involved in any of the development of the bill, so I don't know where the language came from.
I'm just curious, because would other law enforcement agencies have the same concerns? Maybe that's something we can find out.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll look into that. We can always check with the proponents to find out where the language came from. I have listed as written only neutral Colonel Herman Jones, Highway Patrol. Some of these may be oppositions. Jay Hall, Deputy Director, Kansas Association of Counties. I know Matt Hall is listed as neutral, but he is opposition written. Jake Miller, Working Kansas Alliance. Michael Kane, Political Affairs. and Tim Austin, Society of Engineers. Now we'll turn our attention to the opponents. First up, I have Nicholas Gleason, Teamsters Local 696. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. In Genesis 1:26 through 28, we see the creation of humanity, a perfect picture of equality. God made male and female as image bearers to achieve his purpose. God bestowed upon women and men an inherent dignity, value, and worth simply as humans. God also gave life skills like reasoning, common sense, and the ability to adapt. I've been a service provider at UPS for 21 years. In the last 13 years, I am injury and accident free. Each year, I go through a thorough physical in order to keep my DOT card. I get an annual space and visibility ride from my supervisor to ensure my safe driving methods are being followed. I've also been a part of my building safety team for the past 12 years. Also serving as a 5-year term as co-chairman. As part of our safety team, we ask drivers UPS's safety questions. These questions just keep our minds fresh to perform our job safely on the road. On-road safety is important to my employer and it's important to myself. Because as drivers, we know every stop is important, but the most important stop is the final stop, home safe to our families. People use common sense reasoning to handle unexpected events while driving. At UPS, we have a safety phrase, expect the unexpected. A deer darts onto the highway. A flood makes the road difficult or impossible to navigate. Cars are fishtailing, trying to get up an icy hill. These are just examples of the thousands of unknown variables professional drivers overcome each day. I trust my driving skills and the skills of others in my profession because we are not only trained to know what to look out for on roads, we know how to react when these unexpected situations arises. In Kansas, as we all know, weather can change from sunny and 60 degrees to cold and windy in 15 minutes. People do not learn about all these possibilities in a driving school. Instead, we use our everyday common sense reasoning skills to predict actions and outcomes. A few weeks ago, I experienced the craziest weather day in my 21 years of driving at UPS. I had sustained winds of 85 to 90 miles per hour. The wind mixed with dry conditions made visibility of less than a quarter of a mile. With the training I received and my experience, I was able to adjust my routine and finish the day safely. As professional drivers, we see a ball roll onto the street. We know to look out for children chasing that ball. We know our driving behavior when we see the car in front of us swerving, knowing that the driver might be intoxicated or texting. No one knows how to build common sense into cars or in computers in general. In lieu of common sense reasoning capabilities, developers must anticipate and code every possible situation. Machine learning can only help to the extent that manufacturers anticipate every situation and provide training examples of every possible situation. There is no better creation in this universe that God created than the human brain. Why would we replace that when it comes to our family safety? I think it's safe to say that anyone who has been behind the wheel of a car has a scary story to tell. There are 1.4 billion drivers in the world. That is 1.4 billion different stories. How can they possibly all be identified, much less coded? And if AVs cannot perform common sense reasoning to handle all these different situations, are they really safer than human drivers? Some concerns are that computer vision systems are prone to mistakes as they can be fooled in ways that people are not. For example, researchers showed that minor changes to speed limit sign could cause a machine learning system to think the sign said 85 miles an hour instead of 35 miles per hour. Similarly, hackers tricked Tesla's autopilot into changing lanes using bright colored stickers to create a fake lane. In both cases, these changes fooled cars but did not fool people. These are only a few ways a bad actor can confuse cars or trucks into driving off the road or into obstacles. The difference in how self-driving cars perceive the world leads to concerns far beyond hackers. For example, in real-world driving, many Tesla owners have reported that shadows, such as of tree branches, are often treated by their cars as real objects. In the case of the Uber test car that killed a pedestrian, a car's object recognition software first classified the pedestrian as an unknown object, then as a vehicle, and finally as a bicycle. My workplace is on the public roads. Not only am I on them to get to work, to go to the store, to go to church, and to see people, but I am on them up to 12 hours a day, 5 days a week working. I would not be comfortable with my oldest son driving home for the weekend from college with an AV on the highway. I would not be comfortable with my youngest son, who's about to get his restricted license next month, driving to school on Highway 4 with an AV on the road. I worry about my wife, an avid runner, being on the road if vehicles cannot recognize pedestrians and other objects with 100% accuracy. I do not want my workplace or my family to be a testing ground for AV. This bill would allow any company from anywhere in the world to use our highways, our roads, as testing ground for untested and completely unregulated technology. I urge you to stand with the men and women who have kept things moving every day during this pandemic, who delivered supplies to hospitals, who delivered prescriptions to our veterans during bitterly cold winter storms, who deliver goods to grocery stores in the blazing heat in July. It was the men and women of Kansas. Please vote against Senate Bill 379 and keep our communities and our highways and interstates as safe as possible. Thank you.
The committee will hold questions till the end of opposition testimony. Thank you. Next up, I have Senator Pittman.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, you had mentioned that on your list, you have Mike Kane of Layton Construction Laborers as neutral. And you also had Working Kansas Alliance. And if you look in the title of their testimony, it looks like opposition testimony.
Yeah, a lot of it came in late, so it may be misclassified. So read the testimony, please.
I just want to make sure you knew that those were opposition versus what's
Figured a
listed.
couple of them were. Thank you.
Yep.
Next up, we have Wendy Stark, Kansas Association League of Municipalities.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing the League of Kansas Municipalities to offer testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 379. As several other folks have mentioned before, especially law enforcement, we are not opposed to the concept of autonomous vehicles, but we do have several concerns about 379, Senate Bill 379 as written. Section 2 of the bill states that no city or county shall enact any ordinance or resolution regulating or prohibiting the use of autonomous motor vehicles. And we have several concerns and issues related to the term regulating. Does this mean that a city cannot issue a citation? I believe the proponents addressed this and said that was not the intent, but as this bill is written, it appears that a city cannot issue a citation if a vehicle is driving 40 miles per hour in a school zone. Something else in this section is that autonomous vehicles do not have to follow local, or does this mean they do not have to follow local ordinances? Section 3B1 indicates that autonomous vehicles shall follow applicable traffic laws of the state, but does not clarify if these vehicles must also follow local traffic laws. In addition, Section 4B1 states that the owner of the driving system is considered the operator. Does this mean that the corporate owner would be issued a ticket for a violation, or would it be the operator of the vehicle itself? So those are some questions we have about that part of the bill. In addition, we'd like a little bit more clarification regarding the middle mile, which has already been brought up today. Is the intent of the middle mile to be commercial movement from a distribution center to a store, or could this be from an auto parts store to a dealership or a repairman? It says in the term they use is repeatable. So we would like a little bit of clarification on what a repeatable route is and the frequency of those routes. There's also a technical issue in Section 1A2B, which cites KSA 8-1424 to define the autonomous vehicle. That's however, that is providing the definition of a highway. So we are unclear of what the definition for an autonomous vehicle should be. Is that possibly just a typo and should be KSA 8-1437? So due to our concerns, we would encourage the committee to consider amending the bill to ensure that autonomous vehicles adhere to any local traffic ordinances that apply to commercial vehicles. As these autonomous vehicles will be allowed on any public road, and with the concerns we've raised with the bill as written, we believe these concerns are worth further consideration if Senate Bill 379 is to be considered by the full Senate. And I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tony Reinart, Ford Motor Company. Welcome to the committee.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity this morning. Obviously, this is an issue that's near and dear to us. We have been working in this space for some time now. I think our approach has been to look at this in terms of the technology being regulated, if you will, on a federal level, so there's a consistency across the country, and then work with individual states to ensure that anything that we're doing and the industry is doing meets all the requirements of the rules of the road, the traffic laws, liability laws, those type of things. We've been working with our partner, our technology partner, which is Argo AI, and we have operations now in Miami, in Austin, and we're working in DC. Argo's working in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania. We're doing some other opportunities in our research and development operations. And we are out there mapping and deploying and doing pilot projects now in some of those communities. We've done a number of things with pizza delivery or commercial deliveries. We're doing some things now on a rideshare basis. Obviously, as we map and we deploy, we obviously have our pilots in there, right? We have some safety pilots in particular, say on this rideshare app that we're doing now. If you happen to get that in one of those communities, you'll ask if you want to take an AV vehicle, and there will be 2 pilots there, right, that'll be working in that vehicle. So the point being is that safety is obviously job one for us and for this technology to see that this move forward. We believe it's important because of the fact that most of the accidents that happen on the roads are done because of human error. And if you can remove the human error, you can decrease the number of deaths and fatalities and injuries and those type of things. So it's our hope to continue to move the technology forward. Our concern, though, becomes as we look for the states to implement, and we've worked in a number of states now, to ensure that there's some consistency across the states in terms of what we're looking to comply with in the regulation. There is model language. We're part of a number of groups, 2 in particular, which I think you're going to hear from yet this morning. One is AVIA, which is the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, and the Auto Innovators. And I'll kind of leave it up to them to maybe talk about the model language that we're seeing adopted in a number of states, some of which are contiguous to Kansas. And we've been working with some of the groups you're talking about here. I mean, we're working on a project right now with Walmart and a couple of other states. So we're working on these kind of projects now. We're piloting these projects. We're trying to get this technology out there and make sure it's safe. Obviously, it's the number one thing in our minds. But our worry is Senator Pittman is how specific this is and what it doesn't allow for in the state of Kansas. We think it sends a message to the industry, to the technology developers, et cetera, that maybe Kansas, doesn't want to participate in this conversation at this point in time. I don't think that's the case. I'm a regional person here, so I believe that's not the case. I've served previously on the task force, the Kansas Task Force group, and worked with us group. So our hope is that we can work with you on something going forward that is going to allow for mapping and deployment. And our concern too gets to the fact that you're talking about there's air, there's rail, there's freight. There's a lot of things that go into this conversation. And our worry is whether or not you want to limit yourself or whether or not you're going to create a regulatory environment that's going to allow you to work with the technology as it develops. And that's what our hope is, that we can kind of get that conversation going that direction. So I'll be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next up, I have listed as via WebEx, Michael DeCourt.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. My name is Michael DeCourt. I'm a former systems engineering and program manager for Lockheed Martin. For the past 4 years, I've been heavily involved in the air and ground autonomous vehicle industry, including on several Society of Automotive Engineering Committees, or SAE, including those for driverless vehicle testing, artificial intelligence, and simulation. I am also a member of the System Integration and Test Group for U.S. Department of Transportation Voices, which is the virtual open innovation collaborative environment for safety. While at Lockheed, I worked in the aircraft simulation, was the software engineering manager for all of NORAD, a software project manager on an Aegis weapon system program, and the command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance system engineer on the U.S. Coast Guard Deepwater program. That ongoing effort is a $24 billion program to upgrade the Coast Guard after 9/11. It was on that effort that I became a whistleblower in 2006. I reported significant safety and security issues to the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General and eventually the Department of Justice. I also made a YouTube video exposing the issues. That led to my being a lead witness at a congressional hearing, being on 60 Minutes in a documentary movie, several books on ethics, and receiving the IEEE Barris Ethics Award presented to me by the late Representative Elijah Cummings. I mention that resume because I want to establish some verifiable credibility before I tell you exactly why I'm here. I would like to note that the editor of SAE's Autonomous Vehicle Engineering magazine recently wrote an article stating I was prescient regarding my opinions on how the driverless vehicle industry is developing and testing their systems, especially Tesla, and I should have been listened to 4 years ago. The reason I am here in opposition to this bill is not because I'm against the creation and use of autonomous vehicles. I'm largely in support of that technology for both commercial and military use. What I am in opposition to is the approach the industry is using to develop and test that technology. That approach is untenable from a time, cost, and safety point of view. The approach relies on several untenable parts to reach a driverless state of SAE level 4. Those being the extremely immature state of general and deep learning, the use of the real world for most of the development and testing, and gaming-based simulation. Combining these will never create an autonomous system and save the lives the industry wants to save. Rand estimated the miles it would take to stumble and re-stumble on enough scenarios to learn them without even considering the extreme immaturity and lack of inference capability of general and deep learning would be 500 billion miles. Toyota said it was 1 trillion miles. My extremely conservative cost estimate for that trillion miles is $300 billion, and that's per company. But the most concerning part is the literal sacrifice of human beings inside and outside the vehicles to train the machine learning. Machine learning requires scenarios to be experienced to be learned. That requires massive repetition until the neural networks are adjusted and retested enough times to drive the error rate to an acceptable point. While some inference will occur, many crash and edge case scenarios will have to be experienced hundreds or thousands of times each. That means that safety drivers cannot disengage in many cases. So the scenarios can be experienced and the data gathered. Or the human test subject will not be able to safely disengage at the last moment between when the data is gathered and the crash occurs, largely due to not being able to obtain enough situational awareness in time-critical scenarios to do the right thing the right way. It is at this point someone might suggest simulation is used. Well, that is the solution. The problem here is the industry relies on gaming simulation technology instead of simulation technology from aerospace and DoD. This brings us to the entire solution. The industry should adopt that simulation technology, which would be informed and validated by the real world, and augment it with a progressive engineering and safety due diligence approach to prove the technology is ready for the real world, as well as to justify when real world safety driving is necessary. And when it is, those events should be run like a movie set, not the haphazard events being run now involving needless public guinea pigs inside and outside the vehicle for the purposes of hype and building false confidence. I should note here that this is exactly the process the US DOT Voices recommends. The problem here is they are being ignored by NHTSA and the industry echo chamber. Beyond this is the establishment of an autonomous systems driver's test. That test would include information on what scenarios were tested successfully, proof of fidelity of the models used in simulation, and disengagement data to include when the human disengaged to avoid a crash. Not only is none of that being done, Waymo just sued the California Department of Motor Vehicle to avoid providing far less information than this. I ask you, if Waymo or anyone else were actually building the driverless systems they say they are, wouldn't they rush to provide proof to build trust and even differentiate themselves from others? I submit to you that none of this is happening because we are in an echo chamber of largely IT developers who have little actual domain or systems engineering experience. A group of people who got way in over their heads and cannot find the courage or ethical fortitude to admit the king has no clothes. If you look at human history, including aerospace in the 50s, you will see an unfortunate pattern. Human beings especially when they are in for-profit companies, do not make significant grassroots changes, especially regarding safety, without an outside forcing factor. That forcing factor is usually progressive tragedies, press coverage, hearings, and laws. To date, at least 11 people have been killed needlessly in this process, 1 in an Uber and 10 in a Tesla. The majority have been in Teslas for a variety of reasons, including their sensor system is incompetent. They use non-trained customer guinea pigs. Their driver monitor system encourages crashes through a 20-second or longer alarm. And they name
Michael, we're short on time, so you're going to have to probably wrap up your testimony fairly quickly.
I'm going to skip. Gaddix significantly misled this committee to a point of gross negligence. They will injure or fatally injure your constituents. I have filed a complaint on this with the Department Inspector General, the DOT Inspector General on this. I can, make no mistake though, Tesla is make no mistake though, while Tesla's the most egregious, the others will harm and kill people needlessly as well. And I have exact examples of where Gaddix misled this committee, and I believe to the point of being grossly negligent. I would like to thank the committee for giving me the time to speak and would be glad to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Layton Yates, Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Are you still online?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning to members of the committee. My name is Layton Yates. I'm the Director of State Affairs for the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We represent automakers that are responsible for the sale of all new, or 99% of all new cars and light trucks sold in the United States each year, many of which call Kansas home. You saw my colleague from Ford just a moment ago, but also General Motors and Subaru have operations in Kansas. Beyond our automaker members, we have tier 1 suppliers as well as technology companies, many on the cutting edge of the automated vehicle space. Nationwide, we support 10 million auto-related jobs and many thousand auto-related jobs here in Kansas. I'm here today to express our opposition to the bill as drafted. We believe the bill is inconsistent with state AV policy across the country. It extremely limits the innovation that will be capable of coming to Kansas. But I do want to express our desire to work with the sponsor and the committee, and I believe through our local representation, we've provided our model language, which has been adopted in several states to you for your use. Our policy principles are really with 3 pillars. We like cleaner, safer, smarter policy, and AVs actually touch on all 3 of those spaces. And that gets us to Senate Bill 379. We believe it's inconsistent with most AV policies. As Tony mentioned earlier, the auto industry, we prefer a national framework passed at the federal government through Congress. But as you've seen over the years, more than half the country has an AV policy on the books. So our wish for no state patchwork, the ship has sailed. As states take action, though, there is one main desire we have, and that's continuity, consistency across state lines. That's down to the basic framework of your traffic laws, your insurance laws, licensing, registration, insurance requirements, etc. But the most important piece are the definitions. With most bills that are passed through any committee, any legislature, the definitions are at its core the most important piece of the policy and the base of it all. SAE International is the standard setting body for us. They develop the terms, the definitions that we use not only here in the United States, but globally, and make sure we're talking from the same sheet, using the same language. Most of the AV policies in the United States, the majority, are based off these terms. If you look at neighboring states like Nebraska, Arkansas, Iowa, there's legislation in Oklahoma that is consistent, even Colorado, they're all based off of this terminology. And that provides consistency and continuity, as I mentioned. As written, Senate Bill 379 does not provide that. The definitions are inconsistent, even down to the basic ADS definition, the automated driving system. There are missing definitions, such as dynamic driving task, and you may ask what that is. That's the functions of the driving function. And there are terms that are undefined, such as road operator, and even things such as minimal risk condition. That continuity encourages domestic competition. Globally, we want to make sure we're keeping up and being a global leader in the automated driving space. And having that continuity absent of federal law will help us attain that. ADS-equipped vehicles are developed with the goal is to save lives and improve lives. In 2020, there were 3,680 lives lost on U.S. roads. You fast forward to 2021 last year, and we don't have the cumulative number, but we know in the first 6 months, there were 20,000 deaths on the U.S. roads. That puts us on pace for the most deadly year on roads in years where there were fewer drivers on the roads compared to years prior. So that just emphasizes the need for this type of technology to get the crash number as low as possible. And a lot of those fatalities have been attributed to human error, and that's where automated driving comes in as well. But most importantly, we think outside of safety, it limits Kansas, the bill is drafted, limits Kansas's possibility for innovation. Think of those who can't drive or those who don't drive, like your elderly community or your disabled community. Having some sort of automated driving option for transportation would allow some freedom and independence in their community. So they can not only leave their home, but go across town, visit family, go to the store, go to the doctor. Think of those who can't afford the cost of vehicle ownership, or those who don't need to own a vehicle, perhaps those that live in a city center or on a college campus. Ride-sharing opportunities are becoming more and more prevalent. They have been deployed across the country. We believe those expand access to mobility as well as transportation options. COVID has brought some realities to the forefront for driverless and contactless delivery. You've got goods such as the middle mile setting as Walmart has brought to the table, but even things all the way down to your nightly dinner options like Tony mentioned with the pizza delivery.
Layton, you're going to have to wrap this up fairly quickly. We are getting short on time. It's obvious we're probably going to have to continue this hearing, unfortunately. And I'd like to leave some questions for those that have already spoke.
Yes, sir,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman. I just wanted to express our opposition to the bill as written. We provided language to the committee. We want to make sure Kansas is not an outlier, but a technology-friendly state, and have a basic framework that's reflective of the technology today. Happy to answer any questions afterwards, but we want to continue to be a resource and help Kansas innovate.
Committee, any questions for the opposition so far? Senator Pittman.
Mr. Chair, I forgot to ask the secretary. She had mentioned can I ask her a quick question?
Yes.
Since she's here. She had mentioned something about a safety driver program, and mentioned something like 3 to 6 months. Can you clarify?
I should clarify. Right. Within the conversation at KDOT in terms of safety, 12 months would be a better period. We recommend a 12-month pilot program for a safety driver.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions for opposition that spoke so far?
One more, Mr. Chair, for Mr. DeCourt.
You may go ahead.
Mr. DeCourt, if you're still online there. Appreciate you getting on WebEx and testifying this morning. You have quite a few, that's quite a big statement. You've got a reputation, it sounds like, of working with these, but you make a lot of accusations towards Gaddick in the end of your testimony that you didn't get to. Are you still online?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with Gaddick and their history? It looks like you are, but are these generalized based on the testimony, or do you have a deeper history with them?
That's based on their testimony and my experience in the industry.
Okay. So you draw a lot of questions on terms of their scenarios, it looks like, and whether this 100% safety record is actually 100% safety. Is it kind of your angle there is that there's a lot of variations, there's not, that they're deterministic is not as deterministic as it actually sounds? And you're kind of basically looking at that as the basis, not necessarily because they have a history somewhere else that's questionable, right?
Senator, at the end of the day, I think the devil's in the details. Regardless of what I say or they say or the industry says, it's very simple. Ask for the data that they don't want to provide or anybody in the industry wants to provide. What are the scenarios that you successfully tested, including crash scenarios? Give us the list and tell us what those scenarios entailed. Show us the simulation and the fidelity of the simulation used if you use simulation. And tell us about disengagements. And when you do, identify those where the safety driver disengaged to avoid a crash or a possible crash. No one is providing this data. All right. And again, to the point where Waymo recently sued the California DMV to provide less than that.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, committee, on the list, I still had Jackie Beckworth, Ruthie Barco, Ariel Wolf, Daniel Hinkle, Blake Stewart, and Dr. Philip Koopman. Hopefully, we'll be able to get this rescheduled fairly soon. I know we're running up against the deadline. If we have to, we'll get this bill blessed or at least request it. Trying to get this thing moving, though, so stay tuned. With that, we need to get out of here for the next committee. We are adjourned.